Ladies and gentlemen, thank you for staying with us. We went on a short break and we are back now. Just before we went on break, I was talking to Wayman Bennett about why is it that this is happening and what are we as a community doing about it. And Wayman couldn't finish his sentence because we were running out of time for our break, so I'll go back to Wayman again and allow him to finish his sentence. So Wayman,
yeah, I think Golden Dawn in Greece was one of the brunt of the crisis, and our Bangladeshi brothers and sisters had an association because one of them came from Tower Hamlets and set up from the anti-Nazi League days and set up a united front in Greece in order to oppose them, and it was very successful because there was a number of murders. And also, I think what the lesson of that was that you need to unite with everybody in order to stop the fascists, and you have to expose them. And that organisation played a significant role in breaking up Golden Dawn. And I think we have to learn lessons from what they brought in the past and how they worked that inside there. So I think the Bangladeshi Association with Stand Up to Racism in the Greek organisation has played an important role, and we have to learn from them about what they've done, because we're going to have to do that here.
Thank you, Wayman. I will come back to you. Let me now go to Julie. We've heard what Wayman Bennett have said, why this is happening and what we need to do as a community to defeat them. What are your thoughts on this?
Well, I mean, I think one of the key things that we need to do right at this juncture is to expose Tommy Robinson or Stephen Yaxley Lennon, the far right, the forces that are trying to...
Sorry, Tommy Robinson is the false name, is that right?
Yes, he doesn't want people to know that he's called Stephen Yaxley Lennon because he doesn't want people to know about his Irish roots.
Right.
My own family have Irish roots as well, obviously huge immigration, so if you're going to spend your time attacking immigrant communities in the context of, you know, questions of religion and so on, then you don't necessarily want to expose the fact that you're Irish roots. So he likes to be called Tommy Robinson, but it's a lie, it's not his real name. And I think what people like Robinson at the moment, particularly in Britain, but of course we've seen Gerard Batten, the leader of UKIP, jumping on the bandwagon with this, and to be honest, right across the spectrum of the right, including people like Boris Johnson, who are trying to, I think, do two things. I mean, the far right are particularly trying to focus on quite serious issues, like around the question of grooming and abuse, and actually demonise a whole section of our community around this issue. This is something that, you know, as a woman makes me very, very angry to hear that UKIP have appointed Tommy Robinson as an advisor on this question. This is a man who's obviously disrupted, you know, the course of justice for women that have gone through these trials. It's also a man who, you know, known people who were convicted of abuse inside the EDL, who were close to Robinson, and you know, and so on. These people have been convicted of these crimes, and he has nothing to say anywhere about this. So what you can really see, I think, is a kind of rampant opportunism on the part of Tommy Robinson, trying to masquerade as some saviour of, you know, poor white women being attacked by particular communities, and this is an extremely racist line that he's putting out. Of course, we all know that, you know, but I think that's a very important thing to come out and speak out against. Really, that actually we want to say, you know, how dare people target sections of our community, whether it's the Muslim community or any other community like this, and tar people with such a horrible brush when, you know, this is a crime that exists across all different strands of communities. And also, how dare we have the likes of Boris Johnson coming out and making the disgusting comments that he did about women wearing what they choose to wear, and women should be able to choose
what was
whatever.
the comment he made?
He referred to
letterbox.
he referred to women wearing the niqab as letterbox.
Letterbox, that's right. Yes,
and you know, I just think this is not just an attack on Muslim people. It's not just an attack on Muslim women. It's actually an attack on women in general and our rights to choose what we want to wear.
No, absolutely. We live in a free society. People like that.
Yes. And it wasn't done in the context of an interview like this. It was a written article, which meant that he actually knew what he was saying.
Yeah, it was deliberate, and it was a deliberate attempt to pander to and normalise these far right ideas. Really. So I think a question for what we do in our community. I think we have to stand together. I think we have to develop community links. We have to come out and oppose these this mantra that we're being given right now, this horrible Islamophobia, and say all sections of the community are
so basically men, women, everyone from across the community needs to come out
everybody
and
needs
stand
to
up to
stand
these.
together.
send these people home, basically.
Yeah,
That's
because
what we need
these
to do.
attacks are attacks on us all. I think.
Sure.
Yeah.
Adam, did you want to touch on?
Yeah, I mean, well, everything Julie says is spot on. You know, it's about people who when you were fighting racism back in the 70s and 80s, jack boots and skinheads and going around beating everyone up. Instead, they're wearing suits.
Did you
They've
hear
got a
about
bit of money.
Yep.
Sham 69?
Sham 69.
Do you know what it stands for?
I'm a bit young for that.
Basically, Sham 69.
If the kids are united, they
Yeah.
will never be divided.
Yes, yes. Sham stands for skinheads are magic or something, isn't it?
Yeah, but no, they were more
and the year they came out was 69, wasn't it? Hence Sham 69. Sorry. Go on,
No, no, it's all right.
Well, what you said, actually, interesting enough, in modern East London hipster world, you're actually seeing skinheads, people who are tend to be the more progressive ones in this argument, which is beautiful to see. They've kind of taken on the reggae culture. They've taken on a little bit, and it's wonderful to see. So the modern guys of the far right isn't coming, goose stepping down the road. No. They're coming on telly wearing a suit, sounding respectable.
Yes.
Gerard Batten, who you touched on, actually comes from the Isle of Dogs. Yeah. So he comes from an East London heart community, and
lives in Forest Gate now.
Lives in Forest Gate now. Yeah, exactly. It's a case of they're dressed in suits, and you just need to expose them for what they are, the lies they tell, the big lies that divide the communities. It's about calling them out, standing up, meeting them on the streets, meeting them wherever they go, and you got.
But you see, for someone to be able to kind of have that kind of appearance and being able to speak the language in a posh, modern way, can easily manipulate someone perhaps who is less educated, don't really understand the problem, and believing these people in what they're saying. That is a real danger, isn't it?
Yeah, and that's where the education piece comes in, and that's where talking to Mark Zuckerberg at Facebook, talking to Twitter about getting rid of fake news, stopping the production line of these mad theories and false information which just floats around social media. We're not the only country dealing with this problem with fake news on social media. It goes around everywhere, and it stokes fear, and it stokes hatred, and it stokes mistrust in the media and everything else. Yes. I mean, you're having to deal with Facebook groups and bits and pieces at the moment in your role at the GLA, aren't you? And the spreading of false information by people who have very bad outcomes in mind for it.
Sure.
I mean, I've not been around for the rise of the far right in the 80s, but I'm here for the rise of this guise of the far right, and I think it's the word we're missing here is solidarity. Standing in solidarity with brothers and sisters and saying this is unacceptable. Going to your families and your communities and saying this is what's happening, we need to stand together. And there's a big role for trade unions, there's a big role for political leaders, there's a big role for everyone in the community, TV programmes like this, to educate people and say, look, things are bad, living standards are bad, and they're probably going to get a little bit worse, especially with Brexit. Any kind of Brexit's going to cause even more division, even more people being worse off, fewer jobs, less money, worse living standards. And so with that, the rise of the far right, has it ended? I doubt it. I think it's going to get worse before it gets better.
But I can remember Umesh Desai standing up with leadership down in Brick Lane, standing up in front of a young audience from our college.
I'm just going to ask him, I mean, how different is this rise of the far right now than what it was back in the 70s, 80s, and maybe in some parts of 90s as well?
I would say it's actually, it's different generations, different eras, but it's actually far worse. We are dealing with a much more sophisticated, much more internationally organized, much more well-funded operation here. So I would say it's qualitatively it's a much more dangerous threat to us, and it's much more sophisticated, as I said, because it's not around race. It's about, it's a Europe-wide thing, and particularly the Islamophobic side of things, that, we are not racist, but there are too many mosques, or too many whatever. It's destroying our culture, our heritage. And so it's reviving all those images of a European heritage. Now, of course, we should be proud of our culture. False images. And so on. And it's using that fear that there are refugees and migrants flooding into Europe, our
to
system.
kind of wash the mind of ordinary working class people. Yes?
And using those sort of bridgeheads to play upon people's fears, uncertainties, and to win support through elections, and eventually come to power. And we are seeing that, as Adam says, Sweden, one of the most liberal countries. In Denmark, in Copenhagen, they got officially designated ghettos where the different bylaws apply. These ghettos, as it turns out, happen to be areas dominated by black and Tibetan communities, and who actually, in some cases, second, third generation Danish. France, Spain, for the election results, Italy, Hungary, Poland. Poland did a huge march a few weeks ago. 200,000 nationalist people coming out. So it's a European-wide thing which we didn't have in the late 70s.
Sure. Can I perhaps ask Julie this question? You talked about oxygen for these so-called sophisticated rise of the far right. Unmesh talks about well-funded Europe-wide organisation. Where is this funding coming from, and what kind of fundings are we talking about? Is it a huge sums of funding behind these organisations, or what?
There are quite big figures around the US, for example, that are providing funding. The head of, one section that we haven't talked an awful lot about is the alt-right, where you see what's one of them, Count Dacula, I think his name is. There's InfoWars have given large sums of money to Tommy Robinson, and so you can see this kind of influxes.
So where is this large sums of money coming from?
Well,
America?
I don't know.
This is an international operation. Look, there are 5 things that I think we've got to talk about very clearly. The money side, I'll deal with that. Firstly, we got the growth of the street armies of the far right, in the form of the so-called Democratic Footballers Alliance. Nothing to do with football, and certainly not democratic at all. Then you got the rise of the alt-right, which Julie has already talked about. The social media. Social media is fantastic if used the right way, but it also can be used the wrong way.
In the wrong way, yes,
right?
of course. Yes.
Thirdly, and this is the element that certainly worries me, is the meeting of the populist right in the form of people like Steve Bannon. The populist right being people who sort of popular movements around race and so on, meeting the respectable right in the form of Boris Johnson, people who actually are in political parties.
Yes.
And then you got the money coming in from America. So the question that you asked, where is this money coming from? So we do know that there's an initial injection of just $2 million alone to fund a group called the Movement, based in Brussels, headed by Steve Bannon. And let's not forget, Steve Bannon was chief strategist to Donald Trump. And the idea of this group is to organize around the European elections in Europe at a very strategic level, data, literature, social research, and so on. And then also in this country to exploit uncertainties around Brexit. So you got the street army, you got the alt-right and social media, you got the populist right and the respectable right, you got the funding coming in from America in particular. And that is why the threat today is qualitatively
far greater
is much more sort of dangerous than what it was, I would say, 30, 40 years ago.
Right. Okay. Alan, what are your views on this? Do you agree with everything that Unmesh Desai have said?
Yeah, completely. I'd pile in and say the respectable right, or the apparent respectable right, are now feeding off of the far right and trying, and they're playing with fire. They're playing with absolute fire. Boris Johnson in a whim. Remember when he was going to back Brexit or not? He had the choice. He literally wrote 2 articles. Do I back Brexit? Do I back Remain? And he backed Brexit. He chose to walk down the path, and not only has he's chosen to run down it. He's tying himself to these far right elements, and just like you said, he's making it respectable to the point where you've got Nigel Farage saying that UKIP is too far right even for him.
Just one. I said the fifth element. The fifth element that I left out was that the far right has always looked at a charismatic leader to organise the street army, and this is where the danger of Stephen Yexley-Lannan.
And who's organising the street army?
Stephen Yexley-Lannan. So on Sunday, December the 9th, and we'll talk about this more. I'll let Wayman do, because he's organising a protest against
we will talk about that later.
But this
let
is
us just clarify. So in terms of the 5 different
Strands.
strands that you've mentioned. The street gangs are being organised by Tommy Robinson?
It's
Sorry?
Tommy Robinson, but Alan Lake, who
Yeah.
funded the original EDL, was he used to work for a major city firm. And
He's a banker, is he?
He was a banker, and the idea that he's working, he gave them the money and told him to change his name. We exposed it, and the city firm sacked
Then
him.
Got rid of him.
Got
yes.
rid of him.
Yes.
But these people have continued to fund it. Bolsonaro, who's linked to these groups, is also funded by old Nazi gold. In terms of what happened in the last Holocaust,
Right.
these people are networked together,
Right.
so they've used that old money and that new money
Yeah.
to form new far-right movements, which is a danger to all of us. In other words, they've sat down and worked out strategically what's the best way to build a far-right movement, and they fund both of them.
Right.
Steve Bannon worked with a man called Spencer inside America, who's the far right, who's a Nazi actually, and he worked with him in terms of trying to divide people on the basis of race. So these people, when you get down to it, even when they say they're not racist, not only are they racist, they actually refer right back to the tradition of Hitler, Mussolini, and they're a danger to all of us.
Thank you. Julie, did you want to add any more points to what's been said on this, or?
No, I think that's all right for just now.
But this is a danger when we talk about the respectable rights. So Boris Johnson, is considered to be a mainstream politician, is a mainstream politician in that sense, is a member of the Conservative Party, still looking, has leadership ambitions. And with the language that people like him use, is the effect that it has out there on the streets. Because people think, Boris Johnson, he's not a skinhead or fascist or whatever.
He has other motives. He wants to be Prime Minister.
absolutely.
That's right.
But this is where when you use the quite frankly the racist agenda, the populist agenda, the rhetoric, it makes it much more dangerous when it comes from a respectable politician.
Yes, absolutely. No, I
who
totally
is
agree.
part of the mainstream.
But
You know?
surely the British public are not fool. I mean, they can understand, they can see
Well-
what's going on, and
I think we have to look at what's happened in France. We've got Marine Le Pen on the border now. The next alternative after the president is Marine Le Pen. I think there's no room for complacency. Unfortunately, I'm old enough to remember a man called Enoch Powell who made a speech of Rivers of Blood.
Rivers of Blood.
Yeah, and actually it transformed people's lives in a matter of hours.
Yes,
In terms of how
and in fact, he wanted every emigrant to go back to their own
Yeah.
country, even if it meant for them having to remunerate them.
Yeah, but what happened to
going
Enoch
back.
Powell? Enoch Powell was kicked out of the Tory party,
Yeah.
sent to Northern Ireland, and his life as a politician ended. Look what's happening now.
Yeah,
That's not what's happening to
and
those
that
people.
is a different spy.
Yeah.
No mainstream politician today is calling for repatriation. Right?
Yeah.
So, but there is a subtle change.
Yes, yes,
you know,
absolutely.
the message
And-
of
and
race,
the tactic have changed
Yeah,
as
the
well.
tactics have changed.
Yes, yes, absolutely.
But the issues, as I say, of race and racism still remain there. So, I mean, just today's Guardian, for instance, racism in Britain, the stark untruth uncovered at work, injustice in shops, going out, travel. A survey of 1,000 people shows that racism is still very deeply entrenched in our society. Racist attacks take place, but not on the scale that we've seen in some parts of London. Certainly, things are better, which we'll talk about in this program later on. People are not born racist; they develop racist attitudes. But what you get is fascist organizations or people with a very developed ideology of ultranationalism
do you think
seeking to
when we
play on
talk
those
about-
racist fears to win elections.
Do you think when we talk about racism, that blatant racism, in a way, has kind of settled down a bit, whereas institutionalized racism and certainly
Yeah.
organized
Yeah.
racism has somewhat
The-
been
This is the
on the increase?
significance of this survey, which, as I said, David Lamb and other people comment on the survey. That's what the respondents say, that sort of blatant, of racist language, name calling, and so on. Although it still happens, and we saw the example of the disgraceful attack on that young Syrian refugee school child in
Yes,
Huddersfield,
yes.
a town where I actually did my
Yes.
education and entered politics. So, for me, it's got a personal thing. The area Almondbury, where his school is, I actually went to a college there for a few weeks in Almondbury. So it kept, it's very personal to me in that sense. But it's more the institutional of factors that we've got to look at with this survey.
Rashba, can I
talks
just stop
about.
you because we need to go on another break. Sadly, the time.
We could spend the whole night talking about this.
Ladies and gentlemen, please don't go anywhere. Stay with us. We're just going to go on a short break. We'll be back very soon. Thank you. Sorry about that.